I am chatting with Caroline Sutton, and Caroline is a bit of an expert in transitions. Caroline, would you like to share a little bit about your work and how you came to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you today. So,
Okay.
yeah, I practice in the UK as a psychotherapist and a solution-focused hypnotherapist, and I specialize in working with children and families, children and young people who are neurodivergent. And that's because I am neurodivergent myself, and I have a very neurodivergent family. And as I've got a little bit older and understood a bit more about myself and about my family, I have developed, I guess, a real interest, maybe a bit of a hyper focus in helping other people, and particularly young people, with the difficulties that come with having a neurodivergent mind. And my experience is quite varied. I worked for very many years as a specialist nurse, and I worked in some very different settings, but my last role was working in youth offending, so youth justice, and with looked after children. And I came across a lot of young people in those settings who were probably regarded as having difficult or challenging behaviour. And I was always very curious about what had led them to being in that position. Why were they labelled like that? And I think I've always had a belief that that behaviour that is perceived as negative behaviour is generally a communication. It's somebody saying, I'm struggling.
Mhm.
And alongside that, I'm the parent of two young adults. My youngest son has got a complex disability, and he's autistic. He has severe learning disability, and his behaviour could be described as challenging. So we've been through a lot as a family, supporting Max and learning about Max. And Max is 23 now, and I think, Max has been probably the most learning I've ever done. He has taught me so much, and with he is verbal, but his communication is quite limited. His verbal communication is limited. So I guess I've learned different ways of helping him to manage his behavior, of helping me to understand that. And that
Mhm.
led me to working with families who are struggling with challenges, whose young people are struggling with challenges around and anxiety around going to school. As Katie says, transition is a huge issue, for particularly for those of us who have a neurodivergent mind. And so, yeah, my work really has led me to um, an understanding that maybe isn't a mainstream understanding. My belief is that, as I said, that generally, if somebody is experiencing, an outburst, a temper outburst, a difficulty regulating their emotions, that's not a chosen behavior. That is a result of a nervous system that is a nervous system that's overloaded.
Yeah.
So what I'm really passionate about is understanding about the nervous system, how the nervous system works, and then how we can manage our nervous systems to to allow us to be as regulated as possible, to allow us to do the things we want to do, and to recognize the barriers that exist sometimes and how to navigate them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I think understanding that we can't fight our biology, so how can we work with it with compassion is
Yes.
huge. And so maybe you'd like to share a little bit about your sort of your work with transitions and that resilience piece.
Mhm. And I love that you said that word compassion. and compassion is so important to me. And I think that that is the basically the crux of my approach, is that we treat people, other people, treat ourselves with compassion as parents, or as neurodivergent adults, and that we treat our children and young people with compassion, because the transitions, and transitions, by transitions, Katie means moving from one activity to another. And
Mhm.
and that in itself is a fascinating topic, I believe anyway, because a transition, for example, for one person could be, for example, me deciding to go on the train into Leeds, which is my local city, my local big city. But for my son, a transition could just be moving from one room to another. So it's about understanding that transitions happen numerous times throughout the day. And with every transition comes a, a demand to make a choice. And that choice might be, should I go into that room? Or which door should I go through? Or is it actually okay to move into that room? As basic as that it would be, could be with my son, particularly when he was younger, to the point
Mhm.
where he would just freeze and stand and not go through a door. And we
Mhm.
had to use really creative ways to get him to enable his transitions, and we still do at times, to the bigger transitions, which are, for example, for young people transitioning from primary school to high school, transitioning from one classroom to another,
Mhm.
and how again we manage that. And also, I think the thing with transitions is that I think there's a limit to how many transitions our nervous system can cope with. And it's about knowing our own and our children's kind of transition limit. And that
Mhm.
will vary from day to day. Um,
Mhm.
but first of all, we have to understand what it is.
Mhm.
Why is it difficult? And it's basically because or my understanding is that because our nervous system, when we're neurodivergent, is we're very absorbed in our environment, we're interacting with our environment, and then to move to the next environment can be really difficult. Um,
Mhm.
so to actually physically transition into from the house to the car, for example, can be difficult. And I think that can be, I definitely know myself and with my clients that it's worse when they're already overloaded, when they've
Yeah.
already got a lot going on, when their nervous system is already overstimulated. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's minimizing it. When we've got an overloaded nervous system, it's about minimizing the number of transitions we do in a day, if we
Mhm.
possibly can. And for example, for me, I know that I struggle with a lot of transitions. So if I go out in the morning and I'm going to go to the supermarket, I will make sure I've got to pick up some laundry. I need to go for a coffee. I've got to go to the chemist. I'll do it all in one go, because I
Mhm.
know that if I come back home, I won't want to leave again, and I'll find it difficult. So if you take that and sort of apply it to a young person,
Mhm.
it's, for example, parents will say, well, she comes home from school and she doesn't want to go out again. And that's its understanding that actually that's because she's already, transitioned from home to school in the morning. If they're at high school, they're moving into different classrooms.
Mhm.
Might be 6 times a day, 6 different classrooms. Then there's the dinner hall, then there's the playing sports. Then they've got to come home. It depends how they transition home. Do they walk? Do they come on the bus? Do they get a train? And then actually to then expect them to go out again is really difficult. So it's about understanding that, minimizing transitions if we can, but then also tricking our brains a little bit. So one thing that, and Katie, I don't know if you're familiar or you've talked about this, but one thing I learned through my son Max was that if I get him to think, if I give him an object of reference, so for example, if we're going out in the car, I would
Mhm.
give him the car keys to hold, because he's made a physical
Mhm.
connection with the thing that he needs to take his brain to the next step.
Mhm.
That's a
I
very
love that.
basic example of a transition, but we can apply that in a more sophisticated way as well to those of us who don't have learning disability.
Mhm.
So for me, if I sometimes I can finish a busy clinic, I've seen lots of clients, and I can find that I'm actually stuck in my therapy room. I'm not, I'm not physically stuck in my therapy room. I'm not trapped, But in my mind, I find it really hard to leave my therapy room.
Hmm.
So what I need to do is connect with what is the next activity. So I will actually actively think about getting into my car, driving home, eating my dinner, having a shower. So to
Hmm.
try and take my mind onto the next part of the transition to the next thing
Hmm.
that I've got to do. So I don't know, does that make sense to you, Katie? Does that
Yeah.
and is that your was that your understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, we use a lot of visuals. I've always been, if I didn't have my agenda, or I recently adopted Google Calendars. Um, but if I didn't have that visual to sort of be like, okay, these are the chunks of my day,
Mm.
and I do things in chunks. Um,
Yes,
and so
interesting.
to
Yeah.
like see, okay, this is my flow for the day, and I need to look at it the night before, I need to look at it the week before, and it has to be very clear.
Yes.
And I find it really difficult to sort of wrap my head around and energetically kind of prepare myself for it.
Mm.
And so I do the same with my children and with other people that I work with, children and adults as well. It's what are those, like you're saying, visual or tangible cues that we can use to um, prepare ourselves, really, right? And so
Yes.
understanding that for your
Yeah.
child is really important. And I think when you were talking, sort of that overwhelm, it made me think of when you have your baby, right? And
Mm.
so I don't know if you or maybe others who are listening found this, but when you have a child under one and you're trying to go out of the house, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
like
my God, yeah.
all of the things that are involved in that is like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, it's
Yeah,
so overwhelming because it's
absolutely.
so I use that to liken it to the experience
Mm.
for a child
Mm.
in
Mm.
particular.
Mm.
It's not just going to the car or whatever it is, right? There's all the sensory that they're picking up on. What's the
The
next sensory
sensory.
situation going
Yes.
to be? And how do I kind of wrap my head around that to prepare before, particularly if I don't have those visual or tangible cues.
And that's so right. I think what you said is so true. And I think you brought in something that I forgot to mention, which was the sensory issues, about
Mm,
the sensory issues involved in transition, isn't there? It may be that it's cold outside, you have to put a coat on.
yeah.
That's another, it may be that that young person finds that difficult because they don't like to wear a lot of clothes.
Yeah.
Or or the other way around, it may be that they find it difficult to take their coat off when they come inside.
Hmm.
So there's the sensory issues of that, the changing weather, the changing light,
Hmm.
from indoors to outdoors, and so there was something else that you said that I was thinking about there. Oh, it's gone, but it was, yeah, to do with the sensory issues around transition.
Yeah.
And I think that it's something that I find that it's almost like you have a light bulb moment. So it's
Mm,
like you suddenly become aware of transition and then once you become aware of it's you see that you can understand, you can start to unpick some of the problems that can
mhm,
happen, um, but from the point of view of your nervous system when you're trying to transition from one activity to another.
mhm. And I think I'd like to kind of wrap back to something that you and I were talking about before, if you don't mind, but that
Mm.
resilience piece around that. And so I think as a parent, we can there's a few things here. We don't necessarily want to, depending on our child's age, of course, and sort of where they're at developmentally, but there's that fine balance of sort of being not protective, but like setting up the environment so it's really supportive for our child. And then there's that, okay, how can I encourage my child to sort of begin to navigate this for themselves? So, how can I give them those
Yeah.
cues to be able to think about this for
Mm. Yeah. Mm. 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 Mm.
themselves so that they can start to empower themselves, essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think you're right, because it's about, first of all, we need to be aware. We need to be
Hmm.
aware that there's that transition is why transitions why it's potentially challenging. And then we
Hmm.
need to know what we need to understand what is a transition, and then how do we support a transition. And then you say the next bit is how do we empower the child to start to recognize the transitions themselves and recognize what helps them.
Hmm.
Those are the
Hmm.
sorts of things that I would work with in therapy with a young person. I think you're saying the same, aren't you? That's what you would do
Yeah.
with parents and with the young person. And also, I think just being aware that if overwhelm is going to occur, it's much more likely to occur at a time of transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's all those little transitions that maybe our children can get through.
Mm. Mm.
And then it's those bigger ones where you see
Yes.
that crack kind of start
Yeah.
to appear.
Yeah.
And so you were talking about resilience earlier and that ability to notice our body and our own interoceptive or internal
Yes.
cues,
Yes.
which I think is such a gift to give our children.
Yeah. Yeah, because yeah, absolutely. I wasn't given that. I don't think probably my generation were aware of that. And I think it's something I'm now having to learn as an older adult. And I think you're absolutely right. If we can give our children the gift of understanding that now, when they are children and teenagers, that's going to massively support them as they grow into adults.
Hmm. And so, what sort of things would you kind of recommend? Because as parents, you and I were talking about how many of us, many parents weren't taught to notice those cues. And while there's more people who understand that behavior is communication, there's still this, I conceptually know that behavior is communication,
Mm.
but in the moment when I'm triggered by my child's behavior,
Mm.
there's still that um, not impulsivity, but there's still that reaction response. I need to fix
Mm.
this. I need
Yeah.
to solve this problem, calm my child,
Mm.
um, because we're reacting from our limbic system or our subconscious patterning.
Absolutely. And I think some of the most difficult times in my parenting journey were those times when you're all going out somewhere. You've got to be at a restaurant, you've got to be at a party, you're all getting into the car.
Mhm,
And you yourself are aware that you're on a tight time frame. And then you've got a child who probably is struggling with a transition and maybe doesn't understand your time frame, because it may
mhm,
be that they can't tell the time,
mhm,
or they don't understand time. And then we've probably got neurodivergent adults who can struggle with time and planning and executive functioning and those sort of things. And I
mhm,
think, I guess one thing I would say is if you can build in extra time, and not do things in a rush, which can be challenging, then
mhm,
that takes the pressure off. It builds in time um, for things taking a bit longer, for things going a little bit, going a little bit wrong. And I know that's in an ideal world, and it's not going to happen all the time. But
mhm,
it's about thinking about, can I plan in an extra 10 minutes to, and to allow for us to do this more slowly, to anticipate
absolutely.
that something may be more difficult. I also think that we have to forgive ourselves as parents as well, that it's not going to be perfect, and that there are going to be points when we are dysregulated ourselves and we're going to snap. And I'm sure you've covered that before, talking about that. And it's not about being a perfect parent. But it's about acknowledging that you were stressed at that time and maybe you didn't respond in the way you wanted to.
Mhm,
But I think also it's about planning if you can. And you mentioned that, Katie, when you said you have to see your planner, you have to have those blocks of time. And I think it depends how you process, but that it can be really helpful to have a whiteboard or have something where the major transitions are written down.
yeah,
And I know that the young people I work with will sort of quite often articulate to me that it's been difficult at school because
yeah.
that suddenly the timetable will change. There'll suddenly be a change that they haven't been prepared for, that nobody's actually told them about.
Mhm,
And that can be really challenging for them. So again, it's, I think, it's as a parent advocating, and if you know your young person maybe is autistic, or has ADHD, it's making sure that other people who are working with them understand um the importance of giving them warning, giving them time
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
process those
absolutely.
changes.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's tricky with the unknown things coming up. Excuse
It
me, for
is,
sure.
isn't it? And I think something I learned with Max, my son, the things that we think that we know. For example, so we'd leave the house and we'd know that we needed to stop at the to get some gas at the petrol station, but we wouldn't have told him that
Yeah.
because it's obvious to us. And then he'd
Yeah.
suddenly start, screaming, and we'd think, "What's wrong?" But we may have said to him, "Oh, I don't know, we're going to your grandma's house today," but we hadn't said, "Oh, but we need to stop at the gas station in between." And then, so to him, it's different to what you explain,
Yeah.
what you said to him. And also, I think it's being aware that sometimes if something looks different to how you expect it to look, or how the child expects it to look, then that can be really challenging, really difficult.
Yeah. I think we can go into a whole different tangent on that one as well, because there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Maybe we save that for a different conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there anything regarding transitions that you would like to leave parents with today?
Um, Again, I think it's just about that being aware, becoming more aware, understanding about transitions, talking to children about transitions, and planning. But I think the biggest thing I'd say is it's not going to be perfect. Forgive yourself, and just try to be more aware of it, but don't be too hard on yourself.
Definitely. Lots of compassion. We grow together with our children, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, so important.